chemistry or the alchemy of stories. Mullah Nasruddin fell off his donkey and badly twisted his ankle. He hobbled around on it painfully for several months before going to the doctors. And the doctor said to him, "Mullah, this ankle is badly broken. Why haven't you come to see me before this?" And the mullah said, "Well, every time I tell my wife there's something wrong with me, she tells me to give up smoking." And then, Mullah, he purported to be able to read and write, but in actuality he was quite illiterate. So that story about the time when he went into town, and in town there was a fakir, one of those wandering magicians, and he was setting up a stall to say that for a few pieces of silver that he could allow anyone to read. So Mullah, taking advantage of this, went over and put silver in his palm, and the fakir bent over and whispered a few incantations into his ear and then sent him on his way. Well, a few days later, the mullah came running into town, waving a book in the air. "Where is that fellow? Where is that rogue?" And someone said, "Oh, well, he's left town, but mullah, can you read?" And the mullah said, "Yes, I can read, and this book says that all fakirs are charlatans and robbers." So let's see what this Sufi story does for us after that little bit of stirring the pot. There was a certain poet who went to join the circle, the teaching circle of a very great Sufi master. And he was given menial tasks to do, and he wasn't invited or even spoken to by the master. So after several months being somewhat disenchanted, he went to the sheikh and asked him could he leave the teaching circle. And the sheikh said, "Well, yes, what would you like? Would you like me to give you some money to send you on your way, or would you like 3 pieces of advice?" Well, the poet said, "I can't eat advice, so I'll take the money." So the sheikh gave him a quantity of gold pieces and sent him on his way. But the poet hadn't gone very far when he was beset by a band of robbers, beaten, and all his gold taken away from him. And so, of course, his thought was that he never should have been in the presence of the sheikh in the first place. And he leaves the story at this point. But there was also a merchant who came into the presence of the great sheikh, and he too was given menial tasks to do, and he was there for some long while without seemingly receiving any teachings or any direct contact with the sheikh at all. So he too became somewhat disenchanted and went to seek leave from the sheikh. And the sheikh said, "Well, would you like money to take you on your way, or would you like 3 pieces of advice?" So the merchant thought to himself, "Well, I'm a merchant and a trader. I can make money quite easily. I'll take the advice." So the sheikh gave him the first piece of advice and said, "If you're presented with a hard way and an easy way, always choose the hard way." So the merchant thought, well, this was really somewhat useless advice, but he asked for the second piece of advice, and the sheikh said, "Well, if you are offered something large and something small, be sure to take the smaller." So the merchant thought this was also somewhat a useless piece of advice. So he thought, well, with these two, he said to the sheikh, well, I've had two pieces of advice. Can I have a third of the money? So the sheikh gave him 100 pieces of gold and sent him on his way. Well, the merchant hadn't gone too far when he came to a path that was up a steep hill, but he noticed that there was a tunnel that had been built through the mountain. But he remembered the sheikh's advice, and so he decided to take a hard route, which meant climbing the mountain over a mountain pass. But when he got to the other end, he heard from a group of travelers that the tunnel had collapsed just at the time when he would have been traveling within it. Well, he went on his way and he came to a town, and there he had to make some kind of living. So he went to the marketplace, and there was a man selling chickens, and they were rather large chickens. And then just a few stalls away was another man selling quite small chickens, like little bantams. And the merchant remembered the sheikh's advice, and so instead of buying the big chickens, he bought the small ones and started a little chicken farm. And of course he found that in fact the big chickens were not laying eggs at all, but his little chickens were good layers. So he made quite a good living for himself. But before too long, the place where he was staying was invaded by a usurping sultan from another province, and his farm was confiscated and he was taken and sold into slavery. He found himself on a galley, rowing in a galley as a slave, and after some time, on the galley there were some travelers, and one of them happened to be one of those who had shared the learning circle with him when he was with the sheikh. And the galley slave merchant said to the traveler, well, I really should have taken the third piece of advice of our teacher. And the traveler said, yes, after you left, he told us that the third piece of advice that he would have given you was that if you bought a farm, that you should sell it as quickly as possible and move to another place. But then there was a scholar of sorts who also came to the teaching circle of the great Sufi. And he too was given menial tasks to undertake and was not given any attention by the great sheikh. But he remained there for several years until finally he too decided that he would leave. And he went to the master and asked could he be given release from the learning circle. And the master said, would it not be better for you to wait until you are requested to leave? And so, heeding this advice, the scholar remained with the sheikh for several more years, until one day the sheikh called the scholar to him and said, now perhaps it's time for you to leave. What would you like? Would you like to be given gold for your travels, or would you like 3 pieces of advice? And the scholar said, I'll take the 3 pieces of advice. And so the sheikh said to him, if you are invited to eat when you are not hungry, be abstemious. So the scholar noted this piece of advice, and then the master gave him a second piece of advice and a third piece of advice. And the third piece of advice was, when you are offered something, take it. It is time. And the second piece of advice was, never do anything in haste. So the scholar noted these pieces of advice, and he went to gather his few belongings together. After he did so, he came back to the sheikh to take his leave, and the sheikh said, "Oh, we're about to have our repast. Will you join us?" And the scholar said, "I remember the first piece of advice, and I am not hungry, so I choose not to eat." Then the sheikh said, "Well, since you're in such a hurry to leave us, there's a caravan that's leaving very shortly. If you rush, you'll be able to make it in time." But the scholar said, "Oh, I remember your second piece of advice, which is not to act in haste. I choose not to go." "Ah," said the sheikh, "so now it is time. I can offer you enlightenment." And the scholar said, "Yes, this is your third piece of advice. If something is offered to you, take it, because it is time." What is it that arises spontaneously, without thought, as to the deep meaning of this story for us? The chemistry of these stories is to circumvent the mind, to disallow us from drawing on our knowledge, our thoughts, as to what their meaning is. Remembering that we're endeavoring to bring a circle around that creates an aperture for us to enter a new phase. Recognizing that in this place the mind is not capable of eliciting an expression of the meaning, which gives us the possibility that something else can arise as understanding and awareness from somewhere else other than the mind. So when you're challenged to give expression to the meaning of these stories, there's a possibility. The possibility that something arises, that we dare speak Just like the Mawla stories that seemingly have no real sense, and yet we get them at a level. So what arises out of this Sufi story for us? What arises out of our deep place where the integration's taken place? What does this story mean for you?
What was coming up for me, even as you were telling the story, was just hang in there and wait and see what's going to happen, not be kind of impatient to make it happen.
Right on. Right on. What's happened in our lives in asking this question, where do stillness and movement meet? Recognizing that when our mind is no longer capable of reacting with some prior knowledge or experience, we have arrived at a place of stillness. And something arises because there's been a stimulus. The story is a stimulus. So this is so, isn't it? This is our aperture, this is our doorway, this is our opening into this new phase. What is it that comes first in our life now?
God self.
Yes?
Present.
Right. And what does that present contain? Yes? Where is it this chemistry has brought us when the mind no longer has the power to react?
Stillness?
Yes. Stillness. Isn't that the backdrop now instead of the other way around? Where it was movement, constant movement, with maybe a flicker or a moment of stillness. And now it's turned around. That's our doorway. Let's see where it leads us.